Alright, so right behind me in these woods this year, opening day of deer season, I shot my second deer that I've ever shot in my entire life. And it happened to be literally an absolute monster buck. And the craziest part about this is it literally happened within 5 minutes. I was not feeling good that day. I was coming down with a cold. It was opening day of deer season, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to get into the woods as long as I wanted to because I was just feeling so bad. But I knew at the very least if I could get outside, decompress from my long work day, I would feel a whole lot better, even though it was just about half an hour before sunset. I have a small piece of property by my house that I hunt frequently, and I decided to just walk back there and sit for a little while and just honestly be in the woods and decompress. I brought my 257 Roberts that I've been hunting with for the past 2 years. I had just recently made up some new ammo for the hunting season that I was really excited to use. I'd sighted it in just a few days ago. Everything was ready, and I am absolutely stoked at this point for opening day. So I walked back to the spot near my house, and within 2 steps of walking into the woods, I see this huge blob. It looks like just this giant patch that was very distinct from everything else. A tan blob. Not that it looked like a deer, and especially 2 minutes into being in the woods, I certainly didn't think it was a deer. At this time of year, as you can see, with the fall foliage, all the leaves are fermenting and everything has that kind of brown look, and it all kind of blends together. But what I knew for certain was that there was just a giant blob in the woods. It's probably about 100 yards. I couldn't really see just with my eyes exactly what it was, so I decided to put my scope up to this brown blob that I was seeing about 100 yards away. Literally, as soon as I put my scope in the direction of this brown blob, all I saw was a giant rack of antlers. It was literally something out of a dream. I can't even put it into words how it felt. It was just like the lens that I was looking through, it didn't look real. Now, I'm used to seeing deer generally in this area, and I certainly know the feeling of what it's like to, think you see a deer in the distance and then put your scope up to it, and sure enough, well, that's a deer. And to my surprise, I put up the scope and there's just this giant rack of antlers. At this point, I couldn't even count how many of them there were. I just knew it was super wide and there were many of them. So at this point, I immediately just was stunned. I started shaking. I felt my hands just violently shaking. I pulled the gun down with the scope. I looked again. Sure enough, there it was. I took the safety off of my rifle, took a few deep breaths. At this point, I was in a standing position. I put the gun up, waited for my kill shot, and I just honestly couldn't hold it together. The gun was just going like this, and I just could not keep my crosshairs in the correct zone. So I decided to take a breath for a minute. At this point, I thought for sure, okay, it's gonna be over. He's gonna run away. There's no way that I'm gonna be able to stay on this guy, especially bucks. They're super smart, and usually these moments just last and then for a few seconds and then they're gone. But to my surprise, I kneel down because I knew I would be more stable from my knees. I put the rifle back up to my shoulder, get the deer in my crosshairs. Again, same thing. I just couldn't hold it straight, couldn't hold it together. I was at this point just honestly frustrated with myself. I just couldn't get it together. So I was like, all right, you know what? One last thing I'm gonna do. Find even more leverage, better stable ground, more stability. So I put my knee up actually like this, and then I rested my forearm here, and then got my rifle up. And at that point, I was stable. And it was almost as though it was just too perfect. How could this beautiful animal be there almost giving his life to me? That's how it felt. It was as though I was there and he was there, and there was just this few second moment, and it was as if all I can describe it is time slowing down. So I just fell back onto my training, and next thing I knew, I pulled the trigger, and just like that, I saw the deer drop within a few feet. I absolutely knew instantly it was a lethal shot, and I had connected. I'm just stunned at this point. I didn't even have emotions at this point. I was just in this void and just so purely in the moment. And I mean, anybody who's ever taken a deer, let alone this was my second deer that I've ever shot. 2 years ago, I shot my first deer. Also happened to be a buck, but a much smaller buck. And it was one of the most emotional experiences of my life. And this also was the most emotional experience of my life. And the craziest thing is that it happened in the same set of woods right behind me, literally right over here, in the same area within 50 yards. And each time, all I can say is that the sensation that I got right before I took the shot, the few seconds before, there's just this space of time that feels endless, and as though everything is just aligning at the right moment, and then just time collapses on itself and then is interrupted by the bang of the bullet. I'm having a hard time describing it just because it's just such a crazy experience, but I think any hunter who's ever had this experience can relate to it. And for anybody who's a new hunter, I really wanted to try to encapsulate what this feeling is. Even if you're not a hunter yet and you're really interested in getting started, I think there's almost a spiritual-like quality to it. I know it sounds kind of wild. I'm not necessarily a very religious person, but the experience of being face-to-face with an animal right before you're about to take his life is just like none other. It's as though reality is just so present and you feel so alive in that moment and just so connected. And in a spooky way, maybe this is confirmation bias, even though I was sick that day and I put on my camo, I had my rifle, I wasn't really expecting to shoot anything. I had this sensation almost that something was going to happen. And, you know, in hindsight, sure, that makes sense, sort of connected the dots. You could say that was something that was just confirmation bias, and you know what, maybe it really is, but it really honestly almost felt as though that opportunity with this beautiful deer was presented to me. And especially because the buck was so majestic. When I walked up to that buck and I saw him laying there, this thing was an absolute monster. I never actually even weighed it, but it looked, and it certainly felt like a couple 100 pounds dragging out of the woods for sure. But just to see this gorgeous animal laying there, and just this moment of almost ultimate peace and this exchange that happened between me and the animal was just so unbelievably powerful. And I think these are the moments that I really live for and why I hunt. Because being outside in an environment like this and having an experience like that makes me feel human. That's the best way I can describe it. I don't know if it's some deep evolutionary thing or what it is, but it's just an experience like none other. And I really just wanted to give thanks to that animal and discuss what that event was like, especially where it happened, which is literally right behind me here. And I just really want people who are thinking about hunting to also feel inspired to get out there, not necessarily for the literal act of killing an animal, but for all of the things that you experience being in the woods and going in there with a focus and just being connected to the landscape. And if the gift does present itself to you, if a deer does present itself to you, the exchange that you will experience between yourself and that animal is just absolutely incredible. And I think if you ask any hunter out there, I mean, I'd love to hear your guys' experience. If there are any hunters watching this who have had years of experience, I'm sure much more years of experience than I've had, I'm sure you've can attest to the same sort of feelings, and you have all of your stories as well. And anyway, I'd love to hear down in the comments below as well, just because to me, this is just the pinnacle of hunting and why I do it. I really enjoy hunting because of the food element. I'm a huge foodie. I really, really appreciate cooking delicious meals, especially from ingredients acquired from the landscape. But I think for me also, it's this experience that you have and this connection that you can't really put into words until you actually experience it. And so that was my hunting season this year, 2022, opening day in New York. I filled my one and only tag. I wasn't able to get any doe permits this year, and it was just all year looking forward to deer season, and within an instant like that, it was done within 5 minutes on opening day. So it's just such an interesting contrast, because last year I hunted super hard all season, almost every other day of the season, and I took a couple shots even and missed, and there were just so many opportunities, and none of them just lined up in the way that this one did. And it's just so funny how hunting can really be like that. And it's just a testament to how random hunting can really be. One year you'll spend every day out in the woods and you'll not see a thing, you won't get a shot, it's just not in the cards. And then there's a moment like this, where this year I go outside and within 5 minutes I filled all my tags for the season. It's just such a beautiful experience, and I'm really glad I got to share this story with you, and I'd love to hear more stories that you've had out in the outdoors hunting. And most importantly of all, if you're an adult or you started hunting later in life and you didn't have that early mentorship, I really encourage you to take those first steps to get out into the woods and start. And you don't need a lot. You just need a little bit of know-how, and just honestly get out there and experience it for yourself, because it's just truly a magical experience. And I really want to be able to inspire other people who maybe haven't had that much experience in the woods like myself, and didn't grow up with parents that hunted or grandparents that hunted. And hunting can have a somewhat high barrier of entry, especially if you don't have that mentorship. But sometimes the best teacher can just be yourself and trial and error, quite frankly. This is the second deer that I've ever harvested, and only the second time that I've ever butchered a deer myself and had to field dress a deer, which comes with its whole other host of emotions, and what it feels like to put your hands inside of the animal minutes after it's passed away. It's just such a wild experience. And if you can just slow down and trust yourself and just go in and fall back on maybe not necessarily your training, so to speak, but the protocols that you've set in place. Now, all year, as silly as it sounds, I was watching videos on how to field dress a deer, and I watched the same video on YouTube over and over and over again. Sometimes before bed, sometimes in the morning, whenever I had a free chance. And when I had this experience this time and I took my shot and I connected and the deer fell, I had that magical moment, and there was a silence. And then there was the moment that was, okay, what do I do next? And instead of hesitating, which kind of happened the first time around when I shot my first deer 2 years ago, this time I was able to fall back on my protocols. I almost started reciting to myself what I was going to do this time around. Okay, you're gonna go up to the deer, you're gonna make sure it's fully dead, and then I just went through the steps of how to field dress a deer. It was really interesting because my girlfriend, she heard the shot and ran outside, and she came to me and she was just totally amazed to see this beautiful animal. laying there. And then I started to field dress the deer. She described it as though I looked like I knew what I was doing, which in fact I've definitely kind of didn't. It was only the second time I've ever done this, but it was really just the methodical process, falling back onto the protocol. Okay, cut the diaphragm, reach up, grab the heart, pull the internal organs out. And I was reciting it out loud even while she was there. And so she was recalling this, that I really looked like I knew what I was doing. But I think really, in some ways, I was sort of scared shitless, but I just knew what I had to do, and that's what I fell back on. And that's, I think, what gave me the confidence this time around. I've just been blown away at how much more I love hunting every single year that I get into it. And I'm just so happy that even though I didn't grow up hunting, I'm able to do it now. And I want to share these experiences with you to inspire you, and hopefully other hunters out there who are like me, who are starting later in life and don't necessarily have that family background of hunting. And so yeah, anyway, that's all I have to say for today. I'm the adult onset hunter, but don't worry, I'm not the only adult onset hunter. You can be one too. Signing off, and we'll see you next time.